So, James, it's come to light this week that Peter Dutton has made some potentially really good investments just before the global financial crisis.
He has, Jordie. He has. This man, Peter Dutton's in the firing line again this week, and specifically in regards to some of his investments that he disclosed between October 2008 and March 2009.
Yep.
The specific event we're talking about was on the 23rd of January, where he disclosed that he had purchased shares in Commonwealth Bank, NAB, and Westpac. So it's the timing of these purchases that kind of makes it a little bit suspicious.
Okay.
Because he purchased these shares on the 23rd and declared them 23rd of January 2009. The next day, on the 24th of January 2009, the Rudd government announced a $4 billion stimulus package called the Australian Business Investment Partnership to bail out all of these banks.
Yep.
This was as a result, this is due when the global financial crisis was underway. And this is essentially a large stimulus package that would essentially, bail out the banks and a large injection of capital, essentially to keep them solvent, keep everything ticking along. Funny to note, this particular package was never actually brought into fruition. It never actually passed Parliament, but it did cause movements in the stock price, in the share prices as well.
Wait, sorry. So the actual bailout itself, this money didn't pass.
This particular one,
okay,
yes,
as a
but
bill.
it was the announcement of this, obviously, and
the markets responded.
Markets
to that.
responded,
Okay. Yep.
yes. So Peter Dutton, he was in the opposition at the time, so he's denied all foreknowledge of this, and he's pretty much said, look, mate, I'm an astute investor.
Yep.
I was doing what every other, good investor would do. The fact that these shares were so low, obviously with no prior knowledge. It's quite interesting, obviously, because, you think typically he would have been in the position where they would have known this was coming.
Yep.
Which he has, of course, flat out denied.
Yeah.
But it seems to be quite a common thing, especially like in the United States, for example, we have like Nancy Pelosi-like characters who have incredible portfolios, and they've been incredibly fortunate in their trading. And
Astute and lucky.
And I think that's what you really need.
Yep.
So you really need luck, and you just need to be switched on, you need to be tuned into the share market.
Yep.
I'm just going to show you some graphs that I have here just to show you. So I'll put these up on the screen afterwards. These are graphs that show the share prices of the CBA, NAB, and Westpac. And as you can see, they all have a corresponding dip right there. That's pretty much the lowest point.
And what year was this?
That day was the 23rd of March, 2009, the day before the announcement.
Yeah.
So again, Dutto he's done really well for himself.
So he saw the dip, thought, I better purchase these shares now.
Exactly.
Because likely they're going to go back up, which is potentially what could have happened.
It is, and that's that's part of the game, I guess. Isn't it?
Of course.
So this is a video of how he responded, in true fashion of just being a really kind of amicable and likable man. So we'll just watch this clip quickly.
Well, I've bought shares over the years. I remember as a 18, 19-year-old buying shares. So I've invested, and I think a lot of astute investors would have been buying bank shares at that time because they saw value in the shares, and the balance sheets of Australian banks are very important to them, and obviously I saw value in those shares. So look, the Prime Minister's office is shopping around dirt sheets at the moment. Transactions that go back to when I was 20 years of age. I've conducted myself with integrity at every moment of my life, including as a police officer, and since I've been in politics. If the Prime Minister has some claim to make, don't get his lackeys to push it out there. Get up and make the claim yourself. But of course the Prime Minister won't. He's happy to use third parties to try and shop around this sort of detail. That much is obvious, and I think the Prime Minister's office has tried to shop this story to a dozen journalists. One has picked it up, and the others have seen fit not to. I think it reflects poorly on the Prime Minister and the desperation that he's in at the moment. But I've only ever acted with integrity. I worked hard like Joe actually, started out as a butcher's boy many years ago, and I've never stopped working from that day. I've been proud of what my family and I have been able to achieve, and I actually think the Australian public wants somebody who knows how to manage money, knows how to manage the economy. I've demonstrated that as Assistant Treasurer. I've conducted myself with integrity at all times, and if the Prime Minister has a claim to make, why doesn't he get up and make it? Because he's weak, he's out of his depth as Prime Minister, and that's the matter.
So look, he's come out on the attack. So he's not kind of taking this lying down, these claims and these assertions. He's pretty much come straight out. And what is interesting is that he has tried to turn this around, I'd say reasonably effectively, given the media coverage, trying to turn this around and say, so instead of looking at this potentially huge scandal that I'm involved in that is illegal, because it's suspicious activity, to my knowledge, it's the kind of situation where anyone in like the public sector, if anyone else made a purchase like that and made those trades, they'd be subject to scrutiny. Anyone that had the potential of foreknowledge.
So hang on a sec, can I just stop you?
Yeah.
Here at Left Hook Media, we're obviously not implying that he's done anything illegal whatsoever.
No.
We're definitely not. We're genuinely just speculating. The circumstances around when he purchased these shares obviously are
suspicious.
Very suspicious indeed. However, we are purely speculating. We're not implying that any illegal activity took place.
Yes, it has occurred. That is correct.
As he said, he has potentially just made a really good investment. He grew up in the shadow of a factory. He was a butcher's boy, as he said.
He's a working class man.
Correct, and he's just become a very astute property and share investor.
Absolutely. So I actually made a claim a couple of weeks ago that he is worth $400 million, which I believe I read somewhere prior. So I actually thought, in the interest of my own integrity, I'd go back and try and find a source for that. I couldn't actually find a source of that. So I actually formally retract that statement that I made. However, from what I've been able to discern, lots of his wealth is kept in like a family trust.
Yes.
Which is a common practice for kind of wealthy investors and people with large amounts of capital. Because you can kind of distribute it amongst kind of lower income family members and then therefore reduce your personal tax burden. And it also adds a layer of opacity to, to actually to scrutiny of your capital. However, the consensus seems to be he's worth about $300 million.
So not 400, James. You were 100 million off.
That being said, again, I haven't found a definite source, but I have seen that number tossed around a lot in the media. Like if you type up Peter Dutton net worth, there'll be a few articles, most of them coming to around that number. Important to note that in his life, he has made over $30 million in property transactions. So he's bought and sold 26 properties in his time, which, as we all know, property development is the most honest and least sleazy way to make an income.
So he's very wealthy. He's worth tens, if not hundreds of millions.
He's a wealthy man. Correct. He's a wealthy man.
So would you say that he has a lot in common with the Australian layman, with the everyday battler?
Well, as he said, he's just a hardworking Aussie. But no, I would not. Okay. Most Australians have not made 26 property purchases in their life. Most Australians weren't the Foreign Affairs Minister, giving massive no-bid contracts to companies like Palantir, for example, to kind of sketchy offshore detention situations, which were, I'm pretty sure, considered illegal under international law, running rigged visa schemes to allow like Albanian gangsters into the country and workers that were subject to exploitation. So as he said, he's always acted with integrity. And as Industrial Relations Minister Murray Watt points out, he said, look, this is a quote, he goes, look, he's stating the obvious. He goes, this is a guy who's had no real history of trading in bank shares, but he entered into an absolute frenzy of buying and selling bank shares over a very small period of time that just happened to coincide with the same time that the Rudd government was planning and delivering multi-billion-dollar bank bailouts. In fact, Peter Dutton, the records show, bought a substantial number of shares in 3 of Australia's leading 4 banks at a day when their share value was at a record low. So, again, quite suspicious. And I think this is an important time to note because here at Left Hook Media, we like to critique not just things that, like, not just the content of what's happening, but also the way the media reports things. So if you just Google, for example, Peter Dutton insider trading or Peter Dutton shares or something like that, all of the news articles that you'll find, and this is quite a relevant story, it only broke a couple of days ago, all the news articles that you'll find from the kind of mainstream legacy press here in Australia, like the dog food media, essentially, just slop for the trough of piggies. That's how I describe it. Lots of them, they haven't actually focused on the potential illegality and suspiciousness of his act, but they are instead focusing on the dirty tactics that Labor is pursuing in following this up. How it demonstrates Labor's incompetence, So it is really amazing because the LNP does seem to have their media apparatus is the majority of the Australian media, essentially. And there are obviously kind of, some stories and angles that are favourable to the current Labor government, but for the most part, you will have just a complete whitewashing of everything the LNP have done and continue to do, all their policies. Whereas the Labor government and Anthony Albanese are subject to like a pretty insane level of scrutiny. I think an example of this would be the absolute circus that we saw a couple months ago on the media when Anthony Albanese decided to buy a $3.7 million house.
Yes.
Which I will admit, housing is unaffordable for most Australians, particularly young Australians. So it's not a good political move. But it is important to note when kind of pressed about this by the media, he said, look, I'm the Prime Minister, my base salary is $600,000.
Yes. Which if you can't afford a $3.5 million home, it says a lot about your financial investment.
Exactly. And obviously it was not the best timing politically, but it's a lot more understandable than a gentleman who's worth $300 million. And I also think it's interesting, and I think it's a bit reductive to just make this as a blanket statement, but it's interesting that Peter Dutton has always voted in Parliament against any sort of policies that could potentially be implemented to stop the soaring rise in house prices.
Of course. Well, it's not in his interest to do so.
Absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see how the media covers this in the future, and if this will actually be a blow to Dutton in the campaign. Another thing to note as well is that I actually have read that this was presented to the media originally by a Liberal Party staffer. And the Labor Party have since jumped on the bandwagon of pushing this. So if that is true, again, it would potentially show a bit of discontent in the ranks of the LNP. And as we're coming into the election, which hasn't been announced yet, but it will be, I think we can all assume it's going to be in the next few months, these kind of things are going to be more and more important. And it'll be interesting to see how the media, again, kind of whitewashes potentially dodgy dealings that Peter Dutton has undertaken.
Of course. So no smoking gun, that it was insider trading knowledge. However, it is suspicious that he obviously bought during the dip a day beforehand. The prices went up and he was able to make a substantial amount of
profit.
money.
Look, no smoking gun, but you've got the gun, you've got the person that's shot, you've got the bullet casing on the ground. The room smells like smoke.
However, it's quite conceivable, in my opinion, that he would have thought potentially there's going to be a bailout in the works. The the price of these shares is going to go up. Now would be a good time to buy and sell.
Potentially. And that is a question that only Mr. Dutton himself will ever know the answers to.
It does.
But as well, when you think about how you've amassed that much wealth and that much capital over the course of your lifetime, not as a complete rule of thumb, but usually there's going to be some sort of unethical dealings.
And also I think it demonstrates that Peter Dutton does not have a lot in common with the everyday Australians.
No.
And he most likely isn't going to vote for policies or construct policies that would help everyday Australians.
No, I believe that's absolutely true. And if he does, it will only be in an appeal to essentially match Labor's pledging. Because he came out recently and said, look, we're not going to actually cut Medicare because reducing Medicare would be so unpopular amongst the electorate. So he's come out and said, no, we're actually going to match Labor's pledge to expand Medicare. Hilarious.
So it seems inconceivable that he's going to also do anything about housing affordability if elected.
Goodness, why would you?
Because that's where his wealth is and that's how he makes his money.
That's how he made his money, dude. That'd be insane. That'd be like me working in the refrigeration industry, saying, all right, everyone stop using refrigerators. It'd be inconceivable. But look, this is only going to get worse the closer we get to the election. There's going to be insults that people will be throwing mud as the mudslinging at each other
and see what sticks.
And see what sticks, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thanks for that.
No worries, mate. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think one thing's for sure, it's going to be an interesting election season.
It definitely is. All right.